We don't become by intention alone, we become through action. And lasting action is always anchored in purpose. Family, today you're about to hear from a man who helps people stop chasing success and start living in alignment with their calling. Scott Maderer is the founder of Inspired Stewardship, a coaching practice created to serve entrepreneurs and leaders who want to live out their purpose with integrity. Scott helps people align how they use their time, their talent, and their treasures so they can live fully authentic lives. Through his work, Scott has served over 1,000 clients in more than 20 countries and is the author of Inspired Living. Assemble the puzzle of your calling by mastering your time, your talent, and your treasures. In Purpose Plus AI, Finding the Way Behind the What, Scott will show us how to combine.
All right, everybody. So today I'm talking a little bit about small shifts that change how we think. And specifically, I'm going to talk about DISC, which is a communication and personality tool, and using that to notice, to name, and to redirect our thought patterns. So the truth is, what you think is not always the facts. We lie to ourselves a lot. We assume that our thoughts are telling us the truth, but often our thoughts are really just giving us a default reaction. They're not telling us the truth. For instance, have you ever been with a group of people, maybe in a meeting, maybe in a conference, maybe in an event of some sort, and afterwards you'll get together and you start talking about the event, and one person says, things were just moving too slow in that event. And somebody else is like, really? I thought what they were talking about felt really risky, kind of scary, a little intimidating. Another one was thinking, I really just kind of don't want to upset anyone, so I'll just agree with everybody. And the last one's like, before we try that, we need a lot more information. 4 different people attended the same meeting, the same event, got the same information presented to them the same way. And yet they walk out of there with 4 different sets of beliefs, 4 different thoughts, 4 different impressions that come from it. This is the idea that we're talking about today. Because the truth is, the small shifts that we need to make is not about changing who you are, not about changing how you're wired, not about changing how you think, but it is recognizing that we all have internal wiring. We all have ways that we've learned to think and to communicate over the years. And often those come out under pressure. And at the end of the day, we need to recognize that so that we can operate better. And in fact, to extend that another step, we need to recognize that if we have those kinds of differences, so do other people, which means if we're going into and we're the one at the front of that room making that presentation or trying to convince people of something, we need to recognize that all of those different reactions are happening in the room there. So DISC is not about putting yourself in a box. It's not about a label. It is instead about a mirror, a way of looking at yourself and looking at others and noticing default patterns that happen when we make decisions, when we communicate, when we handle stress or react out of stress, and when we respond to change. So real quickly, let me explain DISC. The concept behind it is that there's 2 different characteristics and that each of us have a tendency to go one way or the other on each of those 2 opposite characteristics. So the first one, on the up and down axis, think of the old XY coordinate plane. On the Y axis, at the top you have outgoing and at the bottom you have reserved. Now, to be clear, outgoing and reserved is not about introvert and extrovert. Outgoing has more to do with the energy of your day. It's outgoing people are people that go, 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 go. They get up, they get moving, and they go 24/7. On the other hand, a reserved person is a little calmer, a little slower. They take longer to process information and to think. They don't react as quickly. So as you hear that, think to yourself, in general, most of the time, am I more outgoing or am I more reserved? The other characteristic, the x-axis, the left-right, is task-oriented and people-oriented. If you think about that, a task-oriented person is somebody who, when they're given something to do, when they're given a new activity, when they're given a new process, when they have to do something that they've never done before, they begin to think first in terms of the task. What needs to get done? What are the results? What are the parameters? What's the process? What? They think about the what before they think about the who or the why or the where or anything else. People-oriented people, on the other hand, think first about the who. In that same situation, they're thinking about who do we need to get together to have this happen? Who do I need to talk to? How is this going to impact people? Who is going to be impacted by it? All of their questions revolve around the who. Now, it's not that task-oriented people don't think about people, and it's not that people-oriented people don't think about task. It's just, where does your first instinct go? So again, thinking about that, think about where you land on that axis. So at this point, you should have either outgoing or reserved, and either task or people is kind of what you are most of the time. Now let's go through those combinations. If you think about it, there's 4 possible combinations. In the upper left, this is people who are outgoing and task-oriented. In DISC, we label that with the letter D. It stands for direct or driven or dominant. I prefer driven because dominant tends to kind of come across as negative, but it's not. Direct, driven people, the D, they think we need to decide and we need to move. They're motivated by results. They're action takers. They solve problems. They push through obstacles. However, that also means that they have a weakness, because they tend to think if it's slow, it must be wrong. And if someone disagrees, they're blocking progress and we need to get them out of the way. For those Ds, if you recognize a little bit of yourself, if you called yourself outgoing and task-oriented, one small shift you can already begin to think about is pause before push. What might I be missing because I want results and speed beyond everything else? Let's go to the next category. By the way, that's about 10% of the population that tends to fall into that category. These percentages aren't exact. There really is a range. And obviously, it depends in different groups and how big a group and all of those sorts of things. But roughly 1 out of every 10 people tends to be a high D. I is the next category. These are going to be outgoing, people-oriented people. This stands for inspiring or inspirational or interactive. These are folks that when under pressure, they think energy, connection, buy-in, get the people on board. Let's have fun. Let's get it done. They're encouraging to other people. They create movement and motion. They have a tendency to talk things through. And actually, they have a tendency to talk in general. One of their possible traps, if people are quiet, it must mean they're against me. They don't like me. Something's wrong. If this feels boring to me, it's probably not that important. Maybe I can ignore it. Small shift for them. Ground that energy. And think about what is the next action that you need to take. And make it something small and something concrete. Now let's go down to the S. The S's are going to be the people-oriented, reserved folks. They're the steady group or the supportive group. Their default activity under pressure, stability and harmony. Oh, I apologize. The I's, they're roughly 25% of the population. The S's, we need stability and harmony. These folks build trust. They support people. They like fairness. They like rightness. They don't like conflict. And they create consistency in systems and status quo. However, their trap, they tend to think if there's some sort of tension or conflict, something is wrong. And by the way, tension to them is conflict. They tend to think if they speak up or share something, especially something that they feel might be negative, it's going to hurt the relationship, and therefore I should stay silent. Their shift, say the thing, but say it kindly. What needs to be said, not just for me, but for the good of the relationship or the good of the business or the good of the situation. That last group, but S's are about 30% of the population. By the way, you'll notice now 30 and 25, more than half the population is people oriented. Some of them are reserved, some of them are outgoing, but more than half the population is people oriented. The last group, these are going to be the task oriented reserved folks. These are the C's. They're careful, they're correct, they're cautious. They need accuracy, they need enough information. And if you put them under pressure, they tend to get analysis paralysis because they always want more information. Some of their strengths, they notice details, they protect quality, they think deeply, and they think a lot about the process and the procedures that need to happen. Some of their traps, though, is if it's not clear, I can't take any action. And if it's not perfect, then it's not really done. Small shift for them, move when you've got clarity, but not certainty. Move before you're 100% certain. Ask, what's the next right small step with the information I have right now? What can I do next? So, real quickly, in case you're not 100% sure what you are, I'm going to share 8 statements with you. Each time one of these feels kind of true or very true of you, give yourself a point and record that number. So, in other words, if number 1 sounds like you, say number 1. If number 2 sounds like you, write down number 2. If number 4 sounds like you, write down number 4. Just the ones that you agree with a great deal. And I'm going to put them in chat too, so that you've got them in front of you. So number 1, I like quick decisions and forward motion. If that's you, write down number 1. Number 2, I enjoy talking things through with people. Number 3, I value harmony and dislike unnecessary conflict. Number 4, I want details and accuracy before I make a decision. Number 5, I tend to take charge when needed. Number 6, I naturally encourage or energize a room. And number 7, I am dependable and consistent. And number 8, I tend to notice what is off, missing, or unclear. Now, if you've been listening all along, you've probably already kind of figured out. If you identified with number 1 and number 5, you probably have some D in you. If you identified with number 2 and 6, you probably have some I. If you identified with number 3 and 7, S. And C is 4 and 8. And by the way, if you gave yourself several of those, let's say you had 1 and 5 and you had 3 and 4, so a little bit from S and a little bit from C, realize that really and truly, most of us are a blend of all 4 of these at different levels, and even somewhat in different situations. So your highest score, the one that you had the most from, in that case, I said you had 1 and 5 and then 3 and 4. So 1 and 5 are both from D. That's probably your primary characteristic. But other scores, other numbers, the 3 and the 4, mean you probably also have some S and some C, but you have a blend. Now, this isn't a full assessment. Actually, one of the things that I have available is a full DISC assessment that you can avail yourself of for a small fee that will go in deeper and give you some more insight into both your primary and your secondary style, as well as how are you wired kind of naturally when people leave you alone versus how do you feel in your current environment. And the interesting thing there is if there's a difference between those two, and what does that mean? So here's the framework that I want you to think about. Now that you know a little bit about how you're wired, and you've probably actually, through doing this, started thinking about people around you and thinking about how they're probably wired, here's the framework. Notice, name, and then nudge. Notice, name, and then nudge. First, notice the thought. Notice what your brain says when you react to that prompt that you put into AI, when you see that message or that video, when you participate in that session. What does your brain tend to say first? Is it, this is taking too long? Is it, I need more data? I better not say anything. Oh, they're quiet. They don't like my idea. And then think about the pattern. As a D, you're going to think in terms of speed and control. They're results oriented. They want things to move quickly. I's think in terms of energy and approval. They think about how much fun it is, how much energy is there, how much interaction is there, and does everybody like it? And more importantly, does everyone like me? S, they want status quo, they want stability, and they want peace and justice and fairness. And the C, they want accuracy, they want certainty, they want information. They want to understand what and why. Now, don't try to replace your whole personality. Don't try to replace that thought, but give it a little nudge. Just shift it one notch. As a D, think to yourself, speed, control, those are good. But you know what? Wisdom's even better. As an I, connection matters, but so does follow through. As an S, peace without honesty isn't really peace. And C's, enough information just means enough information to begin. Because the truth is, I see this a lot. I work with a lot of clients all over the world. And in coaching, I often see people trying to change the action, but they don't actually think about the thought behind the action. That thought drives the habit, and then the habit drives the result. So we've got to get back to the thought and not really completely upend it, not completely shift who you are, not completely shift how you're wired. No. But to replace those beliefs with enabling actions, to think about how your beliefs lead to your actions. Here's another one. Think about a real situation right now. Think about some place where your thinking has gotten stuck. Maybe it's around your money, your relationships, your marriage, your leadership, your friendships, your business, your parenting, your time, whatever it is. Give what happens around there. Maybe it was a recent money conversation with your spouse. Maybe it's a business decision you've been putting off. Maybe it's a team member who frustrates you, or a habit that you've been trying to give up for a long time, but just keeps hanging around. Or maybe it's that hard conversation that you know you need to have, but you've been avoiding. Then go through this exercise. Name the situation, just like I just did. Name your situation. And then think, what's that first thought that bubbles up when I think about that situation? What does that sound like in terms of disc? And then what's a better thought that I could practice in that situation? So again, going back to money conversations with your spouse, again, something that comes up a lot in my coaching. I need to talk to my spouse about our spending. First thought, this is going to turn into a fight. That might be because you've got some S in you and you're trying to avoid the conflict. And then realize, you know what? Avoiding this may keep temporary peace, but it's not going to build real trust and real relationship. I'm still going to have some buried frustration or fear or anger. What do I do next? Now, again, you'll notice nowhere so far have I talked about AI. The truth is, you don't need AI to do this. You need awareness. You need good questions. You need repetition. Now, you can put these sorts of situations and have AI ask you these thoughts. And by the way, in my case, I've trained my AI to understand how I'm wired. But then I've taught it that I'm a CD, but I've also taught it these are the strengths and weaknesses of a CD. And I've asked it to help me avoid my weaknesses and talk to my strengths. I've taught it how to do that because the truth is all of these characteristics have weaknesses and they all have strengths. And I want to use my strengths, but avoid my weaknesses. And until you know your own blind spots, AI will just reinforce those blind spots. But here's a way you can do it without AI. Just use your phone or a notes app, or maybe even just this old-fashioned thing called a Post-it note. Maybe you've heard of them. And think about what happened. Think about what did you think? Think about it in terms of your wiring, your disk, and then what's the action or thought that I need to replace it with? Maybe you went to a client meeting. What happened? Your client questioned the activity that you'd come up with, the plan that you'd come up with, the presentation that you'd given. What did you think to yourself? Maybe you thought, this must mean they don't trust me. Think about it. That's an I statement. They don't trust me, not the presentation, but me. You want approval. So wait a minute. Maybe it's they're questioning it, and that may mean engagement, not rejection. Maybe this person receiving this is a C and they need more information. Or maybe they're a D and they want to know, how are we going to put this into action? Or maybe they're an S and they need some reassurance that things will be taken care of and the status quo won't be upset. Ask them, what's your first thought? What's your actual concern? What are you trying to prevent? What would success look like? Step into asking more questions of them and identify how they're wired. Identify first your own wiring and your own bias, but then ask about them. And then begin to reframe things to actually solve that problem. Now, AI can help you with some of this. It can help you brainstorm reframes. You can actually tell it, hey, if my client is this kind of client, especially if you actually know how they're wired, and again, I can help you with that. And then you could ask how to reframe it in a mode that presents best for them. But realize AI can't make the shift for you. It can't make the presentation for you. It can't interact with the person and figure out what they are for you. That part is all you. So another little idea. Complete this sentence. When I notice myself thinking, fill in the blank, I will pause and ask myself, fill in the blank. So it's like as a D. When I notice myself thinking, this is too slow, I'll pause and ask, who needs to be heard before we move? As an I, maybe you think, this needs more excitement. And instead, pause and think to yourself, what's the next action that needs to be taken? As an S, when you notice yourself thinking, I don't want to create tension or conflict, pause and ask, what would the honest thing be and how would it serve this person? As a C, when you notice yourself thinking, I need more information, pause and ask, what can I decide or what can I do with what I already know? Take a minute and write that down yourself. Remember, throughout all of this, your goal is not to become a different person. Your goal is to become a more intentional version of yourself. How you're wired, your disc style is not a problem. They're all good. They're all valuable. But if you don't know it and you don't examine it and you don't understand the strengths and the weaknesses, that could become a problem. So one small shift in how you think can change that one conversation. And one changed conversation changes one relationship. And one relationship can change the whole direction of your leadership, your business, your marriage, your life. So think to yourself, what activities and thoughts show up first for me? And how can I put in a pause and a nudge so that I stop obeying that first thought and really lean into what my gifts are, my strengths are, but also overcome my blind spots? Because remember, at this point, you've hopefully identified your primary disc and maybe even a little bit about your blend. And again, if you want, I can help you go deeper in that. Maybe you've noticed a few of default thoughts that you've had showing up, and you've thought about one small shift that you need to practice. So take a moment, write those down, reflect on those, and then begin to put them into practice today. Thanks again. My name is Scott Maderer.